Hello, my name's Jorb. I love gear. This is Roland's SH-4d, and behind me is New Zealand. I'm sure you can tell this is not a normal video. I'm in the middle of a 2-week trip across New Zealand. And in between the hiking, the rugby, the bungee jumping, all the fun stuff, there's lots and lots of downtime. With a 15-hour flight on either end, about 1,000 miles of driving, and a few nights spent jet-lagged awake in the hotel, there's a perfect opportunity to spend a lot of time with a brand new piece of gear. And lucky for me, Roland had already sent me the SH-4d, so I knew that its hands-on sound design, lap-friendly form factor, and option to be battery-powered made it a perfect companion for this trip. So no, this won't be my standard section-by-section breakdown of what a synth can do. If you're looking for that on the SH-4d, I recommend my good buddy Bo Beats. But instead, what you're going to see from me are some short sketches, some short vignettes recorded here during my downtime at the bottom of the world. And each of those will highlight some sound design feature or maybe one of the engines, something that the SH-4d does that I think is unique and creatively valuable. And then once I'm back home, I'll sit down with each of those projects and break down what I was trying to show you in more detail. Having the backdrop of a vacation is a very real-life example of how I might use this and why I might choose the SH-4d. So I hope you enjoy that. I pitched this idea to Roland as an alternative to an embargo day drop. And not only were they excited enough to let me do it, they agreed to sponsor the video as well. So thank you, Roland. If you're subscribed, thanks for coming back. If you support me on Patreon, appreciate you doing that. It means the world to me. If you aren't either, I encourage you to support me in whatever way fits for you. I'm looking at my notes. I don't think I have anything else to say. You can tell I've already lost my voice today, but that's it. No more exposition. Let's get to the first sketch. Here we are. Let's talk about this first one. So I'm mostly just trying to get as much sound design out of a single patch as I could. And here's the end result. Sort of a tapey, warbly lead. And I had a bunch of different little ideas, and I tried a bunch of stuff, but I'm going to try and step through everything of interest. So I'm using 3 oscillators. That's all of the available ones on the SH-3d model. If I was using SH-4d, I'd have 4. And the 4th fader here is for control of your LFO rate. But most of the interesting stuff is happening beyond that first screen. So that was shift and then our first button here in our oscillator section. And so that's letting me get to different oscillator settings. And a few things that really stood out to me from the beginning, the fat parameter is like wildly interesting. It's like wildly fascinating. I'm going to pull up an initialized patch here to just show you what fat does. Here we are on initialized patch. There's a sawtooth. Shift oscillator 1 settings. If I hold a note and I turn up fat here, it's like tilting the whole wave. And at full, it's an octave lower. But in between, you get elements of white folding, elements of pulse width. It's so weird. It like stretches every other wave. It's something I've never really seen before. And while we're in here, we have pulse width on sounds that might not normally have it. And I do some of that in our first patch as well. Back on the patch I was showing you. That's one of the things we're modulating over time. Let me do this. I'm going to turn off the lo-fi compressor. I'm going to turn off the reverb and the chorus and the delay. Got way quieter. So here we're just seeing that sound, we're just hearing that sound. Sort of really quivering. If I change the LFO here, you can see we're sort of modulating that between both LFO2 and LFO1. And here in the tone menu, you can see that I've got on a mono sound. Let's make it poly. With no effects, I think that's really, really rich. And of course, we're changing other things beyond just the fat mod. But here in the mod matrix here, you can see LFO2 is changing the fat parameter of all three of those oscillators, along with the rate of LFO1. That's something I rely on, I realize a lot, is LFOs modulating other LFOs, is this element of randomness, of evolution. That's pretty much all you're hearing right now. I haven't shown you the big trick of this patch. So on SH-4d and 4d, these are levels of the oscillators. You can see that parameter change whenever I change these. And I was thinking of two things when I made these all different pitches. Get annoyingly big chords, and I remember forever ago an interview with Alessandro Cortini, maybe, using a bunch of different chords recorded on a tape loop and a cassette player, and just using the faders to play that instrument over time. And so I was like, well, especially if I turn back on our reverb and our delay and our chorus. Make it a little more subtle. Something that can move and evolve. Back on monophonic. Really, really cool. That's a lot of what I was trying to play with here. And the effects, I'm relying on this lo-fi compressor, which is going to be really loud now, to do a little bit more of that. If I go down to just the one oscillator, you get some filtering from this lo-fi type. And some compression, again, because I'm thinking that tape thing. I'm thinking a synthesizer recorded to a cassette. There was definitely several versions I recorded where I was doing this. And then also, an old trick with polyphonic octave generators for guitar pedals, if you just bring in other notes a little bit, really thickens in, really fills out what you got already. So this is about getting three oscillators be a little different, but all sort of moving organically, modulated by both LFOs. And still, to further that idea of tape, I'm using LFO1 on a random wave to really sort of subtly change the filter in the amp, like tape warble. bring 2 down, 1 up. Reverb back, chorus back, delay back. And messing with this sound and doing things like this and playing with these models is where I really figured out what I think the SH-4d excels at, and that is sound design. Even just this patch on its own is a lot of like relatively sophisticated tricks that aren't that hard to set up here and sound quite good and are implemented in a way that I think after a little bit of time, a slight learning curve is really, really intuitive. And also recording it and working on all the little sketches you're going to see. The one you saw and the 2 you're about to see, that sequencing and is not necessarily the 4D's strong suit, not relying on at least the internal sequencer as much as I thought I would be. But that's that first sound, a lot of relatively sophisticated, tucked into all these little corners. And before I move on, there's 2 other sounds that you hear in this first demo. Totally nothing crazy, just one really steady, I guess an arpeggio. Has just a flanger on it. I probably didn't even change the settings of it much. Just a drive, and then the rhythm part. I drove this experimental kit. I think a lot of these sounds that they pack in are really, really vibey, really, really cool. And I rely on this mixer page. So there you go. That first one is really built around, let's do a lot of sound design with one patch, let the other stuff just be sort of supporting around it, and get a feel for how deep it can go. And it made me realize how much I like the fat parameter, pulse width on oscillators you wouldn't normally expect it on, the random LFO, and using the mod matrix, which is something I sort of expected to be into. But on this patch, really, it was just LFO 1 and 2, making something that is really evolving over time. On to the next one. My 8.2. So my goal for this one was to have a more sort of a traditional techno thing be the end result. And what I end up with is these 2 arpeggiated lines. And this droning Juno line. Make sure I get the levels right. They're all running into a compressor at the end. Just cranking everything way up, but also making it a little hard to get my balance right. Ah, damn it. That's something I do constantly. I forget where my screen is pointed, and I turn these faders as if I'm still on the screen. Anyway, I'll leave that little flub in to highlight. It's kind of not ideal for trying to change your faders in the middle of a performance, especially if you also need to manipulate the sounds themselves. Regardless, so those are those first 3 sounds, right? And this 4th one is just a kick. And if I bring in the rhythm part, there's a kick there as well. Love that. So I'll show you that fourth part that's just the kick. Can you believe it? Just a resonant filter on the SH-101 model. And because they're all going into this lo-fi compressor at the end, listen to the side chaining. Works really, really, really well. And I liked having a variable control of it. I totally get that I could definitely do that with a part that was in the rhythm section, but I like being able to bring it in separate from anything, especially when I was on this pattern screen with all the other sounds. Anyway, I had some other versions of chained patterns in later ones, and I was never getting it quite to work right, so I just left this. Loop as it was and worked with it from there. But I'm pretty happy with all the concepts I've demonstrated within this. I don't think there's anything super interesting about the sound design of these. I really did stick to sort of expected, I guess, parameters for SH-101 and the Juno. And I want to highlight how much I'd like the inclusion of these models instead of just sticking with the SH-4d and the SH-3d for your like main subtractive sort of sound sources, because I'm so much more used to working with synthesis and parameters like this. And the big advantage of these models, you have this great on-screen representation of what all these controls are going to do, and I don't need to go in and change my oscillator because I can't. I just need a classic synth sound, and I can get it, of course, with the parameters I would have on a 101 or Juno 106. It's not emulating exact behavior like you would expect on, like the ACB stuff, but I don't think that matters. That's not the goal of this. The goal is to give you parameters that will lead you to the same results, and, these start with the Juno chorus as their tone effect, rightfully so, again, because that's part of that sound in a lot of ways. And I sort of got past my point, but to be really, really specific about what I like about the user interface elements on the screen relative to what you get with the Juno, all four of these faders, you know what they're going to do. Noise level, sub-oscillator level, pulse width modulation, manual pulse width is timbre, which it isn't a lot. Again, I'd like a user interface element to dictate that, and LFO to pitch. Plus, our two buttons here are to change on and off our square and our sawtooth. I love the implementation of this in the SH-101. A little bit more the Juno, because I think it uses the buttons better, or you have a better understanding of what the button's going to do before you press it. On this, you sort of need to check and test. And they haven't devoted any space of the interface telling you what these buttons are going to do, but they were happy to do it here on the Juno. This is probably the worst example of having no idea what these faders are going to do until you touch them, especially something like chord. We have no really representation of what these faders are going to do, what these buttons are going to do. It's all you need to wiggle it and find out. And I like, of course, that things pop up on screen to tell you what it is. I would, of course, much prefer an interface like this, or like on the Juno. You have an idea of what these parameters are at when you come to a sound. To sum it all up, I much prefer the user interface when it looks like this. Cool. So yeah, there you go. That sketch became appreciating these sort of historical quote-unquote models and getting a lot of sauce out of this lo-fi compressor. I didn't change much. I just picked a lo-fi type. I wish these had names because they're clearly representative of something. And dialed it up enough that my sidechain was working the way I wanted. Another thing that I used a lot, or I relied on in the sound, I guess, I used the effects. And I tried to use, again, ones that were historical. Integra 7, classic Roland stuff. SDD 320, that's the Dimension Chorus. That's a really cool thing to specifically include in these effects, is not just a chorus, not just a reverb. These are modeled after existing Roland things, and Roland things you might be familiar with, or Roland things that might have historical relevance to you, like the Dimension Chorus, like the Integra, like the CE1. All really, really cool inclusions. But yes, this is all simple sounds based on these historical models, and then effects doing a lot of your work. And this one, as far as like realizing what's possible, I'm really surprised with how flexible this feels as a sound generator for stuff like this. And once you get over some of the quirks of manipulating patches while you're in this pattern mode or whatever, It's honestly a pretty capable interface. Honestly, having hands-on to this all the time is massive. And depending on what you're doing with a sound, with a patch, you could like really, really quickly totally change everything you're hearing. Because having hands-on control to everything for a sound design is kind of like the biggest deal on this. Anyway, I digress. How about the next one? This was a culmination of two things. One, I needed something calming because our flight was delayed and then canceled, and then our 2-day later replacement got canceled. So I was getting home like 4 whole days later than I was supposed to get home. And so while I was sitting in a Holiday Inn on the phone with American Airlines, this is what I was working on. Because, in large part, sound design like this is very peaceful and calming to me. And so, also, I realized I hadn't done much with the FM or the wavetable sound engines, and such a small thing, right? But here is FM with actually pretty interesting waveforms to be doing FM with that has a low-pass filter. It's a lot more common now than it was certainly 10 years ago. But having a subtractive style filter on top of FM parameters, on top of a FM sound engine, is a really, really fun way to design sounds. So you're not hearing a ton of FM movement in the patch. Currently, if I change things a little bit, this is our auxiliary envelope. Great, that's kind of our core sound, but you're also already hearing some movement from the mod matrix. Let's come in here. I'm using the filter envelope to change the LFO rate. Let's listen to that. Sort of hear it change over time and affect our ratio just a little bit. The LFO is changing our fat parameter. Yes, we can do the fat parameter on an FM oscillator or on an FM voice. I think that's crazy, crazy, crazy flexible because you get weird waves from FM already. Now, fat, you get sort of auditory elements of pulse width modulation and wave folding. I really love it. And I wanted to resist using it more. And I wanted to resist using it again and explore other things, but I couldn't help how much I like it. And the LFO is controlling panning. But the keyboard, as like a mod source, is changing our resonance, the rate of the LFO, and slowing down our attack. So if I play a low octave sound, there is our attack. You can feel it rising up. If I play a high octave one, really sharp, abrupt. And I like patches that have that sort of built-in expression. They have that sort of built-in evolution or performance element. Great. And the big thing there is hearing the LFO rate. You can definitely hear the LFO rate being higher for higher notes, and all that leads to a patch that feels much more organic than you'd expect. I hope you're listening in stereo. The panning is pretty cool. Love that. I think the FM is so wonderful. So parts 2 and 3. There's 2, here's 3. Oops. 2, very boring. A lot of high pass in there, just keep it light. Those are on the random play mode in here. So page, and then our second parameter here. Forward and reverse, just reverse, inversion or inverted, and random. And having random just sort of jumper out, I'm getting these little glimpses, little ambient elements. And 4, if I go to the pattern, turn it up again, it's just a drone, a droning version of the lead sound. Parameter, pattern. Wonderful. So this was mostly designed, or I guess set up and composed on an 8-hour flight and then performed on the very last 2-hour flight. And this one I like as well because nothing is that complicated, certainly in what you're hearing, until you like really pay attention to what's going on in this first sound. And especially in regards to how different it sounds when I play low and when I play high. And that's all achieved through the mod matrix. Of course, we're getting a lot of juice from our effects here. So I'm using the Space D for the chorus, the SRV 2000. Can I be honest with you? That's not something I recognize. I just like the sounds I was getting. And SDD 320. I know this is the Dimension chorus, and I'm assuming Space D is also the Dimension chorus. Not actually sure if this is the pedal and this is the rack mount unit or any other differences. Regardless, they just sounded good as reverbs, choruses, and delays for this sound. But that's about all I got to say for walking through these individual sounds here. Let me know if there's anything you had more questions about, because I'm just trying to remember everything that I did. It's been a couple weeks, especially since I did some of the earlier ones. So let me know if there's anything else you want to hear about, and I'll talk to the camera for my conclusions. It took me a little bit of time to get a feel for the role the SH-4d fills, at least for me. And once I put together that it's all about the sound design and not really focusing on the sequencer at all, that's when I started to appreciate all the sound design stuff that it's really good at. And not to like go conspiracy theory mode, it kind of reinforces my total speculative theory that this is somebody's second swing at the SH-32, an old 4-part multi-timbral sound design, sound engine box thing. Totally unconfirmed. And when you think of it as that, as this like multi-timbral sound source, it makes it clear that the sound engines are all really valuable things to have in a box like this, combined with effects. And they're all really capable. I mentioned it already, but my favorites are for sure the SH-101 and the Juno models. They're familiar to me, they're fast, and you have intuitive access to most of the parameters you're going to want. Pretty similar impressions of the SH-3d and the SH-4d models as well. They're just more generic or more flexible, if you want to think of them that way. Waves you might not find on other traditionally Roland stuff. But between those, the SH-101, the Juno, the SH-3d, and SH-4d, that whole like subtractive suite, add in the wavetable, add in the FM, that's a crazy amount of timbral diversity in a box that can do 4 of them at a time, plus really good effects. If there's any downside to all the things I just mentioned, especially the subtractive ones, you don't have hardly any options for the oscillators to interact with each other. And I'm sure that's just part of the way the engine works, and it's made up for in giving you the cross-mod model, giving you the sync model. If you want to think of it as the FM model as well, that too. The other models that I didn't really show, I think draw is cool, but it needs options for modulating the level of different sections or the slope of different sections for it to really be something special. In the PCM model, it's just 4 mixed samples. But it's missing a lot of my favorite PCM samples, my favorite PCM sounds. I want the choir sounds. I want suspense strings, just like the SK-88 or the SC-88. Yeah, suspense string, this is my favorite, I think. Those are my favorites, and they weren't there. So I was disappointed by that. Otherwise, no complaints. The effects, I think, are all good. It's really easy to give feedback on the effects because there's nothing bad about them. We have all the flavors you could want for reverb and delay. There are tons of good implementations of modulation effects, interesting ones, historic ones, characterful ones, and plenty of good options for EQ drive and dynamics. Not one effect felt disappointing, not one effect felt redundant, and there were plenty that really, really surprised me. I used the DJ looper for a tape stop in that last little demo, and I ended up putting the lo-fi compressor on way more stuff than I liked. If it was just drums to beef them up, the master, you saw me use it to make a sidechain. There's some really, really good effects in here. My one kind of major wish list want for the effects is I want to address their parameters in the mod matrix. I want those to be mod matrix destinations. If I could modulate the time on a delay, if I could modulate the mix of the lo-fi stuff, even rate or depth on the modulation things, I think that would be like an enormous increase in the sound design ceiling for somebody like me and what I'm used to working with. But again, for the most part, the effects are really, really good. When I think about what it's good for or why somebody might choose it, why somebody might purchase it over something else, it seems so flexible. It seems so use case agnostic almost, and I like that. To me, a flexible instrument can be valuable to different people for different reasons, and that means it's an interesting product and a cool thing to get your hands on. Because what if you change your mind about what's important to you, or having this means you explore something you weren't going to already, and all that makes this very, very exciting to me, because I can see the SH-4d being exactly what somebody was looking for. Or somebody just wants a way to have 4 SH-101 style sounds at once, and somebody else just wants a way to make sounds while they're on the train. Maybe somebody else is streamlining a live setup. There's so many different use cases for this. for this, and I think that's awesome. So anyway, there you go. That's all I gotta say. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the vacation backdrop, I guess I would say. It was fun to film somewhere else and then let that sort of environment dictate what I worked on at the time, and then that sort of dictates my impressions in the review. So it was cool to put myself in a really different situation for something I've done dozens of times. Sit down with the synth, learn it well enough to tell you what I like. And to do that in a totally different environment made me think about different things and work on different things. And I think, honestly, helped me appreciate the SH-4d in a way that I would not have otherwise. So hope it was fun to watch, because it was fun to work on. So, but anyway, that's all. My name is Jorb. I love gear. Thanks for watching. Roland, thanks for the support. Cheers and so long.